A German shepherd led a U.S. Marine through the weeds and revealed what the night was hiding. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our Marine. He wasn't supposed to be awake at this hour. Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes lay still in the quiet of his small house on the edge of Briar Creek, a town where the night usually felt soft, almost forgiving. But tonight the darkness felt different, thicker, like it was holding its breath. The clock read 2:17 a.m. when Ranger, his German shepherd, lifted his head. No bark. No whine. Just a slow rise, muscles tightening beneath his sable coat. Daniel felt the shift before he even opened his eyes. Ranger rarely moved without purpose. "What is it, buddy?" he whispered, voice rough with sleep. Ranger didn't look back. His gaze stayed locked on the sliding glass door leading to the yard, ears pricked toward the sea of waist-high weeds beyond the fence. Daniel pushed himself upright, sensing the low hum of something unsettled drifting through the air, as faint as a held breath. The room smelled of old coffee and the cool night draft slipping under the doorframe, but beneath it all lingered something sharper, earthy, metallic, like damp soil after a storm. Ranger stepped closer to the door, placing one paw against the glass. Not scratching. Not demanding. Just asking. Daniel rubbed his face, trying to shake the heaviness from his thoughts. Nighttime stillness had become a familiar companion since his return from deployment. Too many memories lived in the dark, and he had learned to treat every unexpected sound with caution. But Ranger wasn't reacting to ghosts. His stance held certainty, not fear. A quiet signal shaped by instinct older than language. Daniel exhaled slowly and reached for the flashlight on the nightstand. "All right," he murmured. "I'm coming." Ranger glanced back at him then, just once, eyes steady, almost grateful, as if relieved that the message had been received. Daniel slipped on his boots, feeling the cool leather against his palms. The air shifted again, a soft tremor rolling through the weeds outside, barely noticeable unless you were listening for it. Ranger was. Daniel placed a hand on the dog's neck, feeling the warmth, the tension, the silent urgency thrumming under the fur. Whatever waited out there in the dark, it had called to Ranger first, and Ranger had answered. Together, they stepped toward the door. Daniel slid the glass door open, and the night breathed against his skin, cool and steady, carrying the scent of damp weeds bending under a soft breeze. Ranger stepped out first, paws touching the wooden deck with careful purpose, as if the darkness itself were speaking through the grain of the boards. Daniel followed, letting the door ease shut behind him, sealing the warm house away. Out here, the world felt suspended. The moon hung low and pale, filtered through drifting clouds, casting faint silver along the yard's edge. Ranger paused at the bottom step, nose lifted, drawing in the air the way a musician might listen for a missing note. Daniel watched the dog's chest rise and fall, listening too. No cars. No voices. Just the hush of the fields and the distant hum of crickets. Yet beneath it all was something else, a quiet tremor, a ripple across the stillness. Ranger moved again, trotting toward the fence line where the weeds grew higher than Daniel's waist. Their tips brushed together like whispers. Daniel shone the flashlight forward, the beam cutting a narrow path through the tangled stems. Dust motes swirled in the light, rising and falling like tiny embers. Ranger did not wait to be led. He slipped through the small gate, pushing it open with his shoulder, and disappeared into the curtain of weeds. Daniel stepped after him, lifting an arm to shield his face as the plants parted around him. The air changed at once, cooler, closer, tinged with the scent of fresh earth and something faintly metallic. His boot brushed against a patch of soft ground, and he felt moisture soak into the leather. "Ranger," he called softly. The dog's head appeared a few steps ahead, eyes glowing gently in the beam of the flashlight. He waited until Daniel reached him, then lowered his nose to the ground again, following an invisible thread that tugged him deeper into the field. Daniel felt his heartbeat settle into the same quiet rhythm as Ranger's steps. There was no panic, only a sense of being drawn toward something that did not want to stay hidden. The weeds brushed his arms as he walked, leaving cool streaks against his sleeves. A faint sound drifted through the night. Daniel froze. It was small, delicate, almost like the creak of a loose hinge or the sigh of a tired wind. Ranger lifted his head, ears turning toward the sound. The dog's tail lowered, not in fear, but in recognition. Daniel held his breath, listening harder. There it was again, a soft, muffled tremor that seemed to pulse through the ground more than travel through the air. Ranger stepped forward, just one step, and looked back at Daniel as if asking him to trust the direction, trust the night, trust him. Daniel nodded without thinking. "Lead the way, buddy." Ranger slipped ahead once more, guiding him through the narrowing trail as the darkness pressed closer, not threatening, but waiting to reveal something that only a dog's heart could hear before a human's ears ever could. The weeds thinned as Ranger guided Daniel toward a small dip in the ground, a shallow hollow shaped by years of rainwater slipping through the field. The air grew cooler there, touched by the scent of stone and something faintly sweet, as if the earth itself had been holding a memory too delicate to release. Ranger slowed, lowering his body slightly, not in fear but in reverence, as though he sensed the moment was changing. Daniel felt it too, a quiet shift in the night, subtle but unmistakable, like a held breath finally exhaled. He swept the flashlight forward, and the beam caught a shimmer on the ground. A small glint, barely larger than a coin, peeking through the weeds. Ranger touched it gently with his nose, then stepped aside so Daniel could kneel. Daniel brushed the grass away. It was a collar. Faded blue, edges frayed, a tiny metal tag dulled by time. When he picked it up, the tag swung softly and tapped his knuckle, light as a whisper. There was a single initial engraved on it, worn but readable. The letter looked familiar, though Daniel could not place why. Ranger watched him, tail still, eyes calm, as if the dog knew the collar was not the end of the trail but the beginning of a truth that had been waiting in the dark. Daniel lifted his head and listened again. The night held another sound now, faint but clear enough to draw a shiver across his arms. It was not a cry. Not exactly. More like a soft hum of breath, uneven, drifting from somewhere just beyond the hollow. Ranger turned that way instantly, paws pressing into the cool ground, guiding Daniel toward a cluster of overgrown shrubs shaped like a small cave. The branches trembled slightly, not from wind, but from something within shifting its weight. Daniel crouched, moving slowly so his light would not startle whatever was hidden. The flashlight beam brushed the edge of an old wooden crate half buried in the soil, its sides warped, its lid tilted open just enough to let out a sliver of warm air. Ranger leaned in and sniffed gently. His ears softened, lowering into a posture Daniel recognized. Not alarm. Recognition. Compassion. Daniel exhaled softly and steadied his hand on the crate's lid. He eased it wider, letting the light spill inside. A pair of small eyes blinked up at him, reflecting the beam like tiny polished stones. A young dog, no older than a few months, curled tightly into a blanket that had once been bright but had faded into muted earth tones. The pup let out a weak sigh, lifting its head only an inch before settling back down, as though holding on to the last bit of strength it had. Ranger moved closer, touching his nose to the edge of the crate, offering a calm warmth that eased the pup's trembling. Daniel felt his chest tighten. This was what Ranger had heard. This was the quiet signal meant for someone willing to listen. He reached into the crate slowly, letting the pup sniff his hand. Its breath was warm, soft, trusting. Daniel felt something steady inside him shift, the way a locked door gives under a gentle push. You are safe, he whispered. The pup closed its eyes, as if the words themselves carried heat. Ranger stood watch beside him, the night deepening around them, not threatening, but protective, like a curtain drawn to give them a moment of grace. Daniel slid one arm beneath the fragile pup, lifting it with the slow care of someone holding a secret the night had been protecting. The small body nestled against his chest, warm but unsteady, its breathing thin and scattered like faint ripples on a quiet lake. Ranger pressed close, his shoulder brushing Daniel's leg, offering steady ground as the world around them seemed to hold its breath. The weeds rustled softly as Daniel rose, cradling the pup with both hands. The flashlight beam wavered across the hollow, revealing the crate, the blanket, the faint impressions of tiny paws in the damp soil. Something about the scene felt unfinished, as though the earth itself wanted him to look again before leaving. Daniel knelt once more, setting the flashlight on the ground. He brushed aside the last of the weeds around the crate, letting his fingers move through the cooler patches of soil. Where the moon caught the dirt, he noticed faint tracks leading away from the hollow, lighter than the pup's, spaced neatly and carefully, as if something older and gentle had accompanied the little one there before slipping back into the night. Ranger leaned in and sniffed the trail, ears soft, tail held in a low thoughtful sway. There was no urgency in his posture, no hint of danger, only the calm recognition of another presence that had passed through this place with intention. Daniel exhaled slowly. The air carried a touch of warmth now, barely noticeable yet distinct, like the lingering heat from hands that had just released their hold. Whoever had brought the pup here had done so with care. Perhaps the collar he found belonged to another dog that guided the young one as far as it could. Perhaps the pup had been carried by something unseen, nudged gently toward the one person who would hear its quiet plea. Daniel rose, holding the pup close to keep it sheltered from the drifting night air. Ranger circled once around him, as if ensuring he had taken in everything he was meant to see before leading him home. The walk back through the field felt different. The weeds brushed his sides the same way, the soil softened under his boots the same way, but the night had shifted. It felt less like a shadow and more like a companion guiding their steps. Ranger walked ahead, occasionally looking back, his amber eyes reflecting a certainty Daniel had come to trust more than his own instincts. As they neared the yard, Daniel noticed how quiet the world had become. Even the crickets seemed to soften their song, giving space to the moment taking shape. The porch light glowed faintly through the drifting weeds, a warm beacon cutting through the early morning haze. Daniel stepped onto the deck and felt Ranger settle beside him. The pup stirred, pressing its small nose against Daniel's shirt as though memorizing the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Daniel unlocked the door and carried the pup inside, the soft warmth of the house blooming around them. He set the pup gently on a folded towel near the couch, adding another blanket for comfort. Ranger sat nearby, watching with a calm vigilance that reminded Daniel of long nights on deployment, when silent companionship meant survival. Daniel knelt, brushing a thumb along the pup's tiny ear. "You are home now," he whispered, letting the truth of those words settle into the room. Outside, the night eased back into stillness, as if satisfied that the message it had carried had finally reached the right hands. Morning seeped slowly into the house, soft and hesitant, brushing pale light across the living room floor as if careful not to disturb the quiet shapes resting there. Daniel stirred on the couch, unsure when sleep had finally taken him. The blanket had slipped halfway down his chest, and the faint warmth of a nearby body told him Ranger had settled close sometime during the night. He lifted his head. Ranger lay at the side of the couch, chin resting on his paws, eyes open but calm, watching over the small bundle curled in the makeshift bed of towels and blankets. The pup slept soundly now, its breaths deeper and more even, rising and falling in a slow rhythm that resembled trust. Daniel rubbed his eyes, letting the peace of the moment soak into him. For the first time in weeks, the house felt less like a place he was passing through and more like a place that was alive again. The silence was gentler, shaped by the presence of two souls who needed him in different ways. He sat up, careful not to disturb Ranger. The dog lifted his head slightly, acknowledging him with a quiet blink. Daniel leaned down and checked the pup, feeling the warmth under the blanket. The small nose twitched, searching for the scent of morning before settling back into stillness. "You made it through the night," Daniel whispered. Ranger gave a low breath, almost like agreement. Daniel stood and walked to the kitchen, stepping softly across the hardwood floor. He filled a bowl with warm water and reached for a clean cloth. The morning light brightened as he returned, casting soft gold along the edges of the room. Ranger shifted to make space, moving with the quiet grace of a guardian who understood his role without needing instruction. Daniel sat beside the pup and began gently wiping its fur, lifting away the last traces of soil and dew caught from the night. The pup stirred, blinking up at him with eyes that held a faint shimmer, as if morning itself had found a place to rest inside them. The tiny tail lifted once, a small hopeful flick. Daniel felt his chest warm in a way he had not expected. He placed a piece of soft food nearby, and after a moment's hesitation, the pup reached forward and took a bite. Ranger watched closely, not intervening, simply offering calm encouragement through his steady presence. As the pup ate, Daniel noticed something he had overlooked in the dark. The blanket the pup was wrapped in had a faint stitched corner, nearly worn away. He pulled it slightly forward. The stitching formed a small pattern, a looping curve that looked like a heart surrounding a pair of initials. They were faded, but readable. The same letter he had seen on the metal tag last night. A soft breath escaped him, not of surprise, but of realization. Whoever had brought the pup to that crate had left more than warmth. They had left a message. Ranger nosed the tag Daniel had placed earlier on the coffee table, as if urging him to look at both pieces together. Daniel picked up the collar again, holding it beside the worn blanket. The connection was unmistakable. Something, or someone, had guided the pup to safety with deliberate care. The night had not hidden a tragedy. It had hidden a kindness. The little pup finished eating and let out a small sigh before curling back into the blanket, nestling deeper into the soft fabric. Ranger settled beside it, his body forming a quiet shield. Daniel leaned back against the couch, the weight in his chest loosening as morning light gathered gently around them. He did not know who had brought the pup this far, or why they had trusted the darkness to carry it the rest of the way, but he felt the shape of an unseen grace in the discovery. Sometimes, he realized, something fragile survives not because the world is kind, but because someone, or something, refuses to let it be alone. The day unfolded gently, as if the morning light had asked the world to move a little slower for their sake. Daniel brewed coffee in the kitchen, the warm scent drifting through the house in soft waves. Ranger lay near the pup, keeping his steady watch, while the small bundle of fur slept curled against the blanket with the stitched initials. Every so often the pup shifted, stretching tiny paws before tucking them back under its chin, as if testing the safety of its new world. When the phone rang, the quiet felt momentarily interrupted. Daniel glanced at the screen. It was Dr. Meredith, the town veterinarian. He had left a message for her after sunrise, asking if she could examine the pup. He answered, keeping his voice low. She agreed to stop by around midday. After the call, Daniel crouched beside Ranger and rubbed the dog's shoulder. "We will have someone take a good look at our little guest," he murmured. Ranger gave a slow blink, calm and certain. The hours passed with a softness Daniel had not felt in a long time. He found himself cleaning the space around the pup's bed, placing a small bowl of fresh water nearby, and checking the windows as if expecting another quiet sign from the field outside. Yet the world remained peaceful. Only once did Ranger lift his head, ears turning slightly, sensing something Daniel could not hear. But after a moment the dog settled again, satisfied. When Dr. Meredith arrived, the pup stirred at the sound of the door opening. She stepped inside carrying her bag, her footsteps gentle on the hardwood floor. A woman in her early 50s, she had the calm air of someone who had spent a lifetime easing fear in animals that could not speak for themselves. "Where is our little patient?" she asked softly. Daniel gestured to the living room. The pup blinked up at her, sleepy but curious. Ranger remained close, his gaze steady but welcoming. Dr. Meredith knelt, letting the pup sniff her hand before she began her careful examination. Her movements were slow and respectful, as though she understood the weight of whatever journey had brought the small creature here. A bit underweight, she murmured, but otherwise remarkably healthy. Whoever cared for this little one did a tender job. The blanket and the crate were meant to keep it safe. She glanced at the stitched initials, brushing them gently with her thumb. This was not tossed away, she added quietly. It was placed. Daniel felt those words settle deep, confirming the sense that the night had carried more intention than fear. The pup let out a small sound, something between a sigh and a hum, leaning toward Daniel once more. Ranger mirrored the motion, lowering his head beside it in an unspoken promise of protection. Dr. Meredith smiled. "It seems you have been chosen," she said. Daniel felt a warmth rise in his chest, the kind that came not from sudden emotion but from something unfolding slowly, like dawn stretching across a quiet horizon. After she finished, Dr. Meredith left instructions and promised to check back in a few days. When the door closed behind her, the house returned to its gentle stillness. Daniel sat on the floor beside Ranger and the pup, feeling the weight of something unseen yet benevolent passing through the room. It felt as though the night had not simply revealed a hidden life but had handed him a purpose he had not known he was missing. Ranger nudged his arm softly, urging him to look once more at the sleeping pup. Daniel placed a hand over the small rising and falling chest and whispered, "You are safe here." Outside, the sunlight shifted across the yard, touching the field beyond the fence with a quiet glow, as if reminding them that some answers arrive not in the dark, but in the gentle hours that follow. Afternoon light drifted through the windows in long, gentle bands, soft enough not to disturb the quiet that had settled over the house. The pup slept again, curled against the blanket with the stitched initials, its tiny breath steady and warm. Ranger dozed nearby, one ear relaxed and the other slightly tilted, always listening even in rest. Daniel sat at the edge of the couch, holding the worn collar he had found the night before. The metal tag, with its single engraved letter, gleamed faintly in the sunlight. He turned it over in his hand, tracing the edges as if the story hidden beneath its surface might rise to meet his touch. Something about it felt familiar, like an echo from a moment he could not fully recall. He set the collar down and exhaled slowly. The day outside had grown calm, but the field beyond the yard carried a quiet pull. He walked to the sliding glass door and looked out. The weeds swayed gently beneath the breeze, moving as one, as though guiding something small and invisible along their tops. A faint flutter of memory stirred in him, something from long ago, something he had chosen not to revisit. It was not loss, not exactly, but the kind of unanswered moment that sits in the back of a person's mind and waits for the right time to surface. Ranger padded over to his side, pressing his shoulder against Daniel's leg. The Marine rested a hand on his dog's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of Ranger's breath. "Do you think someone is looking for that little one?" he asked softly. Ranger did not move, but the gentle weight of his presence answered in its own way. Some truths did not arrive with certainty. They arrived with quiet nudges, steady glances, and the instinct to lead someone into the weeds in the middle of the night. Daniel returned to the pup and knelt beside it. The small creature stirred, blinking up at him with warm eyes that seemed too trusting for how small and fragile it was. The pup let out a soft whine, not of fear, but recognition, as though the scent of Daniel's hand had become familiar. "You are getting stronger," Daniel murmured. He placed a small bowl of water nearby, and the pup moved forward, unsteady but determined, lowering its head to drink. Ranger watched closely, proud and protective, tail giving a slight, contented sway. As the pup finished, it looked past Daniel, toward the field outside, ears twitching at something he could not hear. The movement was faint, yet intentional, like a memory rising inside the little one. Daniel followed its gaze. The sunlight had shifted again, casting a soft glow across the fence line. Beyond it, the field shimmered gently, stirred by nothing he could see. A question formed quietly inside him. If someone had carried the pup to the crate, where had they gone? And why leave both a blanket and a collar, as if preparing the pup for the right set of hands to find it? Ranger moved to the door, sitting upright, posture alert but not tense. He looked at Daniel with that same steady insistence he had shown the night before, when he had pushed the Marine to follow him through the weeds. Daniel felt the same pull now, gentle but unavoidable, as though the day had chosen this moment to remind him that not all answers stay buried. He stepped outside with Ranger and paused at the top of the deck stairs. The wind brushed his face, carrying with it the scent of earth and something faintly familiar, warm and comforting. Ranger took a few steps into the yard, paused, and looked back. An invitation. Not urgent. Not fearful. Simply a quiet request to notice what the world was trying to reveal. Daniel stood there, feeling the weight of the collar in his pocket and the memory of the pup's watchful gaze. He did not know where the trail would lead, but he sensed the night had not finished speaking. And neither had the light. Daniel stepped off the deck and felt the grass bend softly beneath his boots, as though the earth itself were trying to cushion each step. The afternoon had shifted into early evening, the kind of quiet hour where shadows lengthened without urgency and the sky held a pale glow that refused to fade too quickly. Ranger walked ahead with a steady, thoughtful gait, nose low, tail level, not searching blindly but following something subtle, something that brushed the edges of the air like a forgotten melody. Daniel kept a hand in his pocket, fingers brushing the worn collar he had found in the hollow. The metal tag warmed against his touch, carrying a familiarity he still could not place. Somewhere behind him, through the cracked open sliding door, he could hear the soft rustle of the pup moving in its blanket, settling deeper into sleep. The sound anchored him even as he followed Ranger across the yard. At the fence line, Ranger paused. The weeds on the other side swayed with a gentle rhythm, too slow and even to be caused solely by the breeze. Daniel leaned close, listening. A faint murmur threaded through the stalks, not a cry, not a warning, but a breath, the kind that carried memory more than sound. Ranger looked back at him once, a quiet request for trust, then nudged the gate with his nose until it opened enough for him to slip through. Daniel followed, letting the weeds surround him again. They brushed against his arms and shoulders with cool, delicate touches, as if guiding him rather than resisting. The air smelled of earth and fading sunlight, mingled with something warm that lingered from the previous night. Ranger slowed near a narrow path pressed into the soil, a trail Daniel had not noticed before. It wound toward the tree lean, faint but purposeful, as though formed by gentle steps rather than force. Daniel crouched, brushing a hand along the earth. The impressions were soft, barely visible, spaced just wide enough to suggest a medium-sized animal. Not the pup. Something older. Something protective. Ranger touched his nose to one of the impressions, then lifted his head, scanning the fading light. Daniel felt the same subtle pull he had felt the night before, a quiet sense that something unseen had moved here not long ago. As he rose, a flicker of movement caught his eye between the branches. He turned, holding his breath. A shape slipped through the edge of the tree lean, almost blending with the shadows. The figure paused just long enough for the light to catch the soft tan edges of fur and a tail that swept the ground in a slow, gentle motion. A German shepherd. Older. Lean but strong, carrying itself with the calm grace of an animal that had spent more time protecting others than being protected. Daniel did not move. Ranger froze too, his body lowering slightly in a gesture that was neither threat nor submission, but recognition. The shepherd watched them with warm, steady eyes, then shifted its gaze toward the direction of the house, where the pup slept under Ranger's watch an hour earlier. A soft sound left its throat, almost like a hum. Not fear. Not warning. An acknowledgement. As if saying, "You found what I left." Before Daniel could take a step forward, the shepherd lifted its head and blinked slowly, a gesture filled with a strange, quiet peace. Then it turned and slipped deeper into the trees, its body drifting through the shadows as if it belonged to them. Ranger stayed still until the forest quieted again. Daniel let out a long breath he had not realized he was holding. The evening air felt different now, touched by something he could not name. He looked down at the faint trail in the soil and the space where the shepherd had stood. Whoever that animal was, it had carried the pup as far as it could. And last night, it had trusted Ranger, and him, to do the rest. Daniel placed a hand over his pocket, feeling the collar press gently against his palm. Now, the engraved letter no longer felt like a mystery. It felt like a whisper. A signature left in the dark by a guardian who had chosen to stay unseen. Daniel remained standing at the edge of the tree long after the shepherd's silhouette had dissolved into the soft blue dusk. The air held a stillness that felt almost reverent, as if the forest itself were acknowledging a promise exchanged between living beings who did not need words. Ranger stood beside him, shoulders squared, gaze fixed on the place where the shepherd had vanished. Not tense. Not expectant. Simply honoring the moment. Daniel placed a steady hand on Ranger's back, feeling the quiet strength beneath the fur. He knew we would come, Daniel murmured. Ranger's ear twitched, agreeing in his own calm way. They walked back toward the yard, their steps guided by the fading light. The sky had softened into deeper shades of lavender and rose, and the first stars blinked awake above the horizon. When Daniel reached the porch, he looked back once more. The weeds swayed gently, parting in a pattern that looked nearly identical to the path Ranger had carved the night before, as if the land itself remembered the journey. Inside the house, a soft sound greeted them. The pup, awake now, let out a gentle whine, stretching its paws as if greeting the world after a long, comforting dream. Daniel knelt beside it. The pup looked up, then pressed its nose into his palm, breathing in with a familiarity that felt older than a single night. Ranger lay down beside the pup, placing his front paws carefully on either side of its blanket, creating a circle of quiet protection. Daniel noticed the blanket again, the worn stitching that framed the faded initials. He lifted the corner to the light, studying the tiny loops of thread. The initials were delicate, hand-sewn, the kind of detail someone makes when they love what they are holding. A. Memory stirred, rising from deep within him like a photograph developing in slow motion. A town several miles south. A woman he had met at the farmer's market last spring. She had rescued dogs, mostly older ones, giving them a home when no one else would. He remembered her warm smile, the way she spoke about each animal as if it were carrying a story. She had mentioned one shepherd in passing, a gentle soul who wandered her property at night, protective but kind. She had laughed softly and said, "If he ever brings you something, it is because he believes you will understand it." Daniel had forgotten that conversation. Until now. He looked at Ranger. "You think that was him?" Ranger blinked slowly, as if saying, "You already know." The pup nuzzled into Daniel's knee, then reached for the collar he had placed beside the couch. Its small teeth wrapped softly around the worn leather, pulling it closer to him. Daniel lifted it gently from the pup's mouth. The metal tag gleamed faintly, reflecting the warm light. The letter engraved on its surface matched the initials on the blanket. It was not coincidence. It was intention. A message guided through the night by a shepherd who had trusted Ranger, and Daniel, to finish a journey he could not complete alone. A soft breeze drifted through the slightly open window, carrying the scent of the field and something faintly floral, almost like a memory of the woman's garden. Daniel felt a quiet understanding settle over him, gentle as a prayer. Some dogs protect with their bodies. Others protect with their choices. And some, he realized, protect by leading you into the darkness so you can bring someone else back into the light. The pup yawned, curling once again into Ranger's warmth, as if certain that its small world had finally found its center. Daniel placed the collar beside it, whispering, "You are home now, little one." Outside, the forest exhaled, and the night closed in softly, as if satisfied that its hidden truth had finally been brought into the open. Night settled gently around the house, folding itself into the corners with a softness that felt almost protective. Daniel moved quietly through the living room, checking on the pup one more time. It slept curled against Ranger's side, its tiny chest rising and falling with a calm that had not been there the night before. Ranger remained awake, eyes half open, as if keeping watch over both the pup and the silence that wrapped around them. Daniel sat beside them on the floor, letting his back rest against the couch. The weight of the collar in his pocket pressed gently into his leg, a constant reminder of the shepherd who had appeared at the edge of the trees and offered its unspoken trust. He drew the collar out and held it in his hands, turning it slowly. The metal was warm now, shaped by his touch. He traced the letter engraved into the tag and felt a quiet ache inside, not of sadness but of recognition. The house lights were dim. Only a small lamp near the hallway glowed, casting amber reflections across the wooden floor. Daniel's gaze drifted to the window. Beyond the glass, the field shimmered beneath a soft moon, the weeds swaying in gentle arcs as if remembering the shepherd's steps. A faint hum of wind brushed against the siding, creating a lullaby of movement. He looked back at the pup. It let out a small sound, something like a dream-soft murmur. Ranger responded instantly, lowering his head to nudge the pup with the gentlest touch. The pup settled again, comforted by the warmth of a guardian who felt more like a safe place than a companion. Daniel smiled softly. "You chose well, buddy," he whispered to Ranger. Ranger shifted his gaze to Daniel, calm and steady, as though acknowledging the truth in those words. Daniel leaned his head back, closing his eyes for a moment. The room held a warmth that felt deeper than temperature, a warmth born from recognizing that something fragile had survived because it had been guided by quiet faith rather than chance. When he opened his eyes again, he noticed something near the pup's blanket. The pup had pushed the stitched corner toward him, the tiny heart-shaped pattern catching the lamp light. The thread was faded but still bright in spirit, each loop telling a story of hands that had sewn love into fabric. Daniel lifted the blanket's edge, feeling the softness between his fingers. He imagined the shepherd carrying the pup in its gentle mouth, guiding it through the weeds, placing it in the crate with this blanket wrapped around it. Not abandoning. Delivering. Offering. Trusting. Ranger let out a quiet breath, settling his paws more firmly around the pup. Daniel touched his shoulder. "You saw him before I did," he said. "You understood." Ranger blinked, slow and sure. The kind of blink that held wisdom older than training. A sudden shift of light caught Daniel's attention. The moon had risen higher, casting a brighter glow through the window. It illuminated the path beyond the yard, the same path Ranger had followed the night before. For a moment, Daniel imagined he saw a silhouette standing at the far edge of the weeds, watching with calm assurance. No movement. No sound. Just presence. And then the breeze shifted, and the image softened back into moonlit grass. Daniel let his breath out slowly, feeling something inside him loosen and settle. The pup stirred again, stretching before pressing deeper into Ranger's side. Daniel placed the collar gently beside the blanket, letting the tag rest against the soft fabric. "Wherever he is," Daniel murmured, "he knows you are safe now." The lamp flickered softly, and the field outside rustled as if in agreement. Ranger lowered his head and gave the pup a tender nudge, sealing the moment with a quiet act of devotion. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second, feeling a warmth spread through him, not loud, not sudden, but steady. A warmth that felt like grace arriving on silent paws in the middle of the night. Morning arrived with a gentleness that felt almost deliberate, as if the world wished to preserve the quiet grace that had settled over the house during the night. Pale gold light drifted across the living room floor, touching Ranger's fur and the small curve of the pup's back as they slept. Daniel woke to the soft rhythm of their breathing, a sound steady enough to calm the lingering edges of his dreams. He sat up slowly, allowing the stillness to greet him before he moved. Ranger lifted his head, offering a slow blink that carried both reassurance and a question. The pup stirred at the sound, stretching its tiny legs before rolling closer into Ranger's side, seeking warmth and comfort with instinctive trust. Daniel smiled and rubbed Ranger's ear. "You two look like you have been keeping watch over each other." Ranger leaned into the touch, tail brushing lightly against the floor. Daniel rose and walked to the kitchen. As he filled the coffee pot, he kept glancing back toward the living room, half expecting to see the silhouette of the older shepherd standing at the window. But the morning remained soft and quiet, carrying only the smell of coffee and the faint scent of the field outside. When he returned to the living room with a mug in hand, he noticed something new. The pup was standing on wobbly legs, looking around the room with sleepy determination. It toddled forward a few steps, then paused, glancing back at Ranger as if asking permission to explore. Ranger nudged it gently, encouraging without forcing. The pup approached Daniel, sniffing the hem of his jeans before sitting down with a clumsy plop. Its eyes carried a brightness that reminded him of dawn breaking through clouded skies. Daniel knelt and scratched the pup's chin softly. "You are really waking up to the world now, little one." The pup let out a tiny sound, somewhere between a sigh and a squeak, then rubbed its head against his hand. Ranger came over and sat at Daniel's side, forming a quiet circle of protection around the pup. Daniel looked again at the collar resting on the couch. He picked it up and held it near the pup. The small creature leaned forward and pressed its nose against the leather, taking in the scent with a familiarity that seemed to reach deeper than memory. "You knew him," Daniel whispered. The pup pressed closer, as if agreeing. Daniel felt a soft ache inside him, the kind that comes not from loss but from witnessing devotion that asks for nothing in return. He could almost see the older shepherd guiding the pup through the darkness, nudging it forward when its steps faltered, sheltering it from the night wind, and finally leaving it where it would be safe. Ranger suddenly walked to the sliding glass door, tail raised in a calm, alert posture. Daniel followed his gaze. The field shimmered beneath the morning sun, the weeds glimmering like brushed gold. Nothing moved there, yet Daniel sensed a presence lingering in the edges of the light, as if gratitude itself had taken a quiet shape before dissolving back into the earth. He opened the door slightly. Cool morning air drifted in, carrying the warm, earthy scent of the field. Ranger stood tall, ears forward, eyes soft. It was not anticipation. It was acknowledgement. A silent farewell offered to a companion who had trusted him to finish what he could not. Daniel whispered, "Thank you," letting the words carry into the breeze. For a moment, the air shifted with a gentle warmth, almost like an answer. He closed the door and returned to the pup, who now curled peacefully beside Ranger. The morning light pooled softly around them, wrapping their small circle in a warmth that felt like the final piece of a message delivered through the quiet hands of night and the faithful heart of a shepherd who had never stopped protecting what mattered most. The day eased into afternoon with a tenderness that felt almost intentional, as if time itself understood the need for quiet healing inside the small house on the edge of the field. Sunlight drifted in warm ribbons across the living room, brushing Ranger's fur with soft gold and illuminating the pup curled protectively against his side. Daniel sat nearby, restoring order to the room in slow, thoughtful motions, though his mind remained tethered to the moment he had stood at the open door whispering gratitude into the breeze. Every sound in the house felt different now. The soft creak of the floorboards. The distant hum of the refrigerator. Even Ranger's steady breathing. All of it carried a gentleness he had not felt in years, as if the presence of the older shepherd still lingered somewhere just outside the edges of sight. When the pup woke, it lifted its head with newfound strength, blinking toward the sunlight before pawing at Ranger's leg for attention. Ranger responded with a careful nudge, guiding the pup forward without overwhelming it. Daniel watched them, a smile forming without effort. "You are finding your feet," he murmured. The pup stumbled toward him in small, uneven steps, its ears too large for its head, its tail flicking with quiet determination. When it reached him, it pressed against his knee, looking up with eyes that seemed brighter than they had that morning. Daniel scooped the pup into his hands, feeling the warmth and the feather-light heartbeat beneath its fur. The pup let out a small woof, then nestled against his chest as if claiming a space it had been waiting for. Ranger sat beside them, posture tall and serene, watching as though ensuring the connection was sealed. Daniel ran a hand down Ranger's back. "You brought him home," he said softly. "You understood what I did not." Ranger responded with a single slow blink, the kind that carried more meaning than words. Later, when the pup drifted back to sleep, Daniel stepped out onto the deck. The field beyond swayed beneath the afternoon breeze, the weeds shimmering in soft waves. It felt like standing before a living memory, one woven from the night's quiet revelations. He walked to the fence, resting his hand on the sun-warmed wood. For a moment, he imagined he could see the faint outline of paw prints trailing toward the trees, the same delicate path Ranger had discovered. The wind shifted, carrying with it a scent that reminded him of earth, cedar, and something warm, almost like a familiar presence passing by unseen. Daniel closed his eyes, letting the breeze brush his face. He did not need to see the older shepherd to know it had been there. Some guardians did their work in silence. Some completed their task and stepped back into the world without expecting acknowledgement. When he returned inside, Ranger was lying near the pup again, head lowered, eyes soft. Daniel knelt beside them, feeling the warmth of their small circle wrap around him like a blessing. The pup stretched, pressing its tiny paws into Ranger's fur, and exhaled a long, content sigh. Daniel placed a gentle hand over both of them, as though anchoring himself to the moment. He felt something shift inside, not dramatic or sudden, but steady and grounding, like a stone settling into the deepest part of a riverbed. It was clarity. It was purpose. It was the quiet understanding that some journeys begin in darkness, only to reveal a path back into the light. Daniel whispered, "You are safe, both of you." Ranger leaned his head into Daniel's arm, sealing the truth of the words with a simple, loyal gesture. Outside, the breeze softened, and the field glimmered under the warm afternoon sun, as if nature itself was offering its final, gentle confirmation. Evening settled slowly over the house, not with the heaviness of an ending but with the softness of something being gently laid to rest. Daniel stood by the window, watching the last traces of sunlight fold themselves behind the tree-line. The field beyond the fence moved in quiet waves, each ripple a reminder of how the night before had begun and how much had changed since then. Behind him, Ranger and the pup rested on the living room rug. Ranger lay stretched out, his breathing deep and steady, while the pup slept curled into the warm space beneath his chin, its tiny body rising and falling in perfect harmony with Ranger's. The blanket with the stitched initials draped softly over the pup, glowing faintly in the amber light from the standing lamp. Daniel watched them for a long moment before easing himself down beside them. The wood floor was cool beneath his hands, grounding him, anchoring him to the quiet truth unfolding in the room. The pup stirred, lifting its head with that same gentle determination it had shown throughout the day. It blinked toward Daniel, then pawed its way into his lap, nestling there as if it had already chosen where it belonged. Ranger shifted only enough to accommodate the pup's movement, then returned to his tranquil watch. Daniel rested a hand over the pup's back and felt the small heartbeat pulsing beneath his palm. A fragile rhythm, yet steady now, no longer trembling the way it had when he had first lifted the pup from the crate. The change was subtle, but unmistakable. The pup was not simply surviving. It was beginning to trust the world again. As the room dimmed with the falling light, Daniel found his gaze drifting to the collar on the coffee table. Its faded leather and single engraved letter looked almost luminous in the soft glow. He reached for it and held it gently, letting the cool metal rest against his fingertips. The pup recognized the sound of the tag brushing his palm and leaned forward, placing its tiny paw on the collar as though claiming part of its story. Daniel traced the letter again, feeling a deep warmth settle in his chest. Somewhere out there, an older shepherd had chosen this path. Chosen Ranger. chosen him. Not by accident, but by faith. A soft sound came from outside, just the wind, brushing lightly past the siding. Yet for a fleeting second, Daniel felt a familiar presence in that breeze, a quiet reassurance, like a guardian taking one last look before moving on. He closed his eyes, letting the air drift across his face. It carried no chill, only warmth, as if touched by a memory that refused to fade. When he opened his eyes, Ranger was watching him, head tilted, eyes steady and calm. Daniel reached out and rested his hand on Ranger's chest. "Thank you for leading me," he whispered. Ranger lowered his head, leaning gently into the touch. The pup curled deeper into Daniel's lap, letting out a small sigh that filled the room with a kind of peace he had not felt in years. The sun disappeared completely now, leaving only the soft glow of the lamp and the quiet breath of two animals who had walked beside him through a night that had changed all three of them. Daniel looked from Ranger to the pup and felt a truth settle into his heart, quiet, unmistakable, and full. Sometimes, he realized, grace did not arrive in grand gestures. It arrived in the form of a shepherd who led you through the weeds. A pup who placed its trust in your hands. A night that hid only what your heart was ready to understand. Daniel drew the pup close, letting its warmth rest against him, while Ranger inched nearer, forming their familiar circle. And in that small, glowing room on the edge of the field, surrounded by breath and trust and unspoken vows, Daniel finally felt something settle inside him that had been wandering for far too long. He felt home.